So here is a tutorial showing how this battery was built in Microsoft Excel. So as you can see, this is really a chart, and if you can watch the formula bar, I stepped into a cell that shows 590 minus E2 and then 5. And then I'm selecting the whole chart area, so you can see that the whole chart area is feeding from that range of 4 cells. The two cells, the cells at the beginning and the end are 5, and those represent the small gray edges of the battery, and then the cells in between represent the rest of what should have been 100%, but it's spread across 100 minus 10, which is 90. That's the logic for why you're seeing 90 there. And then I've highlighted it in red ink so you can see the cells in the background. I made them invisible for the demonstration. So I'm just going to rebuild the battery from afresh so that you get a full sense of how this was built. And I've designated the range of 4 cells, starting with 5, ending with 5, and in between 90 and then 90 minus 0. And why the two cells in between are connected to each other is because when one increases, the other will reduce. You'll see more about that in a moment. I've selected the range and I've set up a chart, and I'm going to remove all the chart noise, the chart title, the chart axis, the chart outline. I'm removing all of that. And then I'm just going to switch row and column so that it shows up as the real stacked bar charts that it needs to be. And I'm shrinking that a bit so that you get the full view. So the next steps is just to remove the rest of the chart noise, the grid lines, and the axis. And I just untick them in the chart elements area. Now I'm going to go over to start coloring in to match the battery that we saw in the first outline. So the first thing is to remove the fuse, of course, from both the main chart area and the focus chart area, and then change the area of the chart that's represented by the last five to gray, and the first one to gray as well. I've made the field gray, and then I'm still going to go back during the tutorial to make the outline gray as well. The next thing I'm going to do is to color in what shows up as the field section of the battery that we're looking at. And I'm going back to the main area so that you can see how that was set up. So that's essentially a gradient. The gradient that represents just a shading at the bottom shading only. So when you go into fill in Excel and you go to the gradient area, it's going to show different types of gradients. There's bottom left gradient, top right gradient, bottom right gradient. The gradient that we're going for is just a pure bottom gradient, and that shows up as the second option from the left. So I'm going back to the main chart so that you can take another look and see that in detail. And then I'm going to go to my new chart, make the fill, first of all, plain green, and then make the gradients that last one, that is the bottom only gradient. And then the effect has come out, and then the part of the cell that represents the empty area, I'm just going to make that new fill. And then I've gone over to ensure that all areas of the chart that have been set up, all 4 cells represented in the chart, have the gray outline so that it looks like the battery that we all know. And then finally, and then I'm just testing it out so you can see that it's working exactly as it should. And one last thing I just ended up adding just for this demonstration, it wasn't in the original battery design, was a label that shows the percentage of the chart as it grows on and up. Of course, I added the form control so that you can automate the process of changing the battery cell life. And by doing that, I added a spin button. That's the form control shape there. And from format control, I changed the minimum value to 0, maximum to 100. Maximum will actually be 90 in this demonstration, but I just made it 100. And then the cell link is the um the original cell that was labeled 90. And finally, like I mentioned, I add a chart label, so that it shows the percentage of the battery as it increases and reduces. I want it to show up as a percentage, and the data fields we're working with are not percentages. So I'm going to go back, and of course, a percentage with no decimal places. So I'm changing the decimal place from 2 to 0, and I'm going to make the label value from cells instead of I made it an empty cell, but I'm going to go back and create a formula that connects that empty cell to the actual chart data, and it's going to be the chart data divided by 100, so that that's an actual percentage. And then I'm going back into normal number formatting to just format that number, and there you have it. There's a label set up for the chart, and the label changes just as the chart changes as well.